In a quiet cul-de-sac lined with well-kept lawns and matching mailboxes, the treehouse began as nothing more than a weekend project. A father, an architect by trade, but a child at heart, decided to build something magical for his 8-year-old son. A towering oak sat at the edge of their backyard, roots deep, branches wide, almost asking to be transformed. What started as a simple platform and ladder grew into a miniature wooden refuge. It had a small deck, a pitched roof with shingles, even tiny windows salvaged from an antique shop. It was safe, solid, and built with love, not a nail out of place, every support beam over-engineered. It wasn't just a treehouse. It was a masterpiece. The first week it was finished, neighborhood kids flocked to see it. It became the heart of every game, every adventure, every childhood secret. Laughter echoed from its walls. Parents took pictures in front of it. Even strangers walking their dogs stopped in the street to marvel at it. But where most saw wonder, one person saw a problem, an offense to her world of control and rules. The neighbor 2 houses down, a woman whose life revolved around her title as HOA secretary, watched the structure with a hawk-like fixation. She had built her identity around the power to enforce order. In her mind, nothing should exist in the subdivision without being measured, approved, and stamped. The treehouse, to her, was an unauthorized structure, a violation that would topple every rule she held sacred. While the family celebrated their creation, she was already flipping through her copy of the HOA bylaws, highlighting sections, taking notes. What made matters worse in her eyes was the attention the treehouse received. Cars slowed down to admire it. Kids begged to play in it. It stood taller than the generic sheds everyone else had installed. Its balcony peeked over a hedgerow. To her, it was an invasion, one that disrupted the perfect picture she believed her neighborhood should be. Every morning, she stared at it through her kitchen blinds, seething as children laughed. First came the letters, neatly typed, clipped to the family's front door, with carefully numbered citations to HOA codes that didn't actually apply. Then came the demands to remove it. When the parents politely ignored her, she escalated, not to conversation, but to enforcement. The HOA board gathered in her living room, where she spoke for an hour straight about her grave concerns. She stood at the front like a prosecutor delivering a case. But the parents had done their homework. They knew the treehouse was on private property, undersized limits, not attached to any utilities, and technically classified as a play structure, which required no HOA approval. No rule had been broken. Not legally, not structurally, not morally. That only infuriated her more. With no real power left, she chose the most aggressive move she could think of. She called the police. It was a Sunday afternoon when the cruisers pulled up, 2 patrol cars parked at the curb as if responding to a crime scene. Children scattered. Curious neighbors peeked from windows. The father calmly walked out to meet the officers while the neighbor stood nearby with her arms crossed, fully convinced the treehouse would finally come down. But after a simple inspection, the officers concluded there was no violation. They left, apologizing for the inconvenience. The neighbor watched them drive away, her face flushed with humiliation. That moment changed everything. The family, frustrated but deeply amused, realized something profound. If she wanted to treat the treehouse like a serious structure, they would do exactly that, but not the way she hoped. What she intended to destroy, they would upgrade beyond her wildest expectations. They spent the next week researching zoning laws, accessory dwelling unit regulations, tiny home guidelines, and residential short-term rental permits. They hired a contractor, gathered documents, and submitted applications. While the neighbor thought she had won a moral victory by involving authorities, the parents quietly filed for official approval to convert the treehouse into a fully permitted backyard lodging unit. Not only would it be legal, it would be recognized as a habitable structure, far beyond the reach of HOA complaints. And better yet, it would be profitable. The architect father, now fueled by spite and creativity, redesigned everything. The open slats became insulated walls. The play windows became double-pane glass. A compact loft bed was installed. A ladder became a staircase. Solar panels were mounted. A composting toilet was fitted. Every detail was both functional and aesthetically flawless. The neighbors, still unaware, watched as contractors arrived, materials unloaded, and the treehouse grew into something entirely new. The HOA secretary drove past slowly, shocked and increasingly furious, but unable to do anything as the permits were visibly posted. It was all legal, and she couldn't stop it. By the time she realized what was happening, the project was almost complete. The treehouse wasn't just a play area anymore. It was now a tiny cabin nestled in branches, a rustic escape with cedar walls, ambient lighting, and a view of the sunset that no ground-level home could match. In a way, it embodied everything she feared: creativity beyond control, autonomy against authority, and a family refusing to bow to pettiness. But what came next would hurt her far more than she imagined. Because the family didn't just upgrade the treehouse, they listed it. Not as a guest room, not as storage, but as a fully furnished Airbnb. And guests began booking. While she stared out her kitchen window in disbelief, the first rental car rolled up the driveway. She had called the cops on a child's treehouse. Now that treehouse was earning more money per night than her entire HOA board made in a month. And this was only the beginning. The first Airbnb booking felt like a small experiment, half curiosity, half revenge. The listing went live with professional photos taken at golden hour, soft light hitting the wood grain, lanterns glowing warmly inside, the loft bed draped in blankets that looked straight out of a magazine. The description framed it as a tiny treehouse retreat, perfect for writers, couples, travelers, or anyone seeking quiet escape. It was whimsical, cozy, and unlike anything else in the area. The nightly rate was set modestly, just high enough to justify the effort, but not so high that it seemed like a joke. Within hours, it was fully booked for the first month. The parents stared at the notifications as if watching something surreal unfold. What had started as a spite-fueled upgrade suddenly looked like a real business. Then, the reviews rolled in. Visitors described it as magical, peaceful, life-changing. One guest wrote that they had cried waking up to the sunrise through the tree branches. Another called it the best Airbnb experience I've ever had. People weren't just staying there. They were emotionally moved by it. And the numbers reflected that. The bookings paid the mortgage. Then they exceeded it. Soon, the treehouse was generating more income than some full-size homes. Meanwhile, the neighbor across the street watched every check-in like she was witnessing a crime. She noticed strangers with suitcases. She noticed lights on at midnight. She noticed laughter and clinking glasses from the canopy walk at dusk. Her fixation turned to obsession. She logged license plates. She wrote down dates and times in a notebook. She checked the local Airbnb map and nearly fainted when she realized the listing was publicly visible. She complained to the HOA, but this time the board was indifferent. The family had permits, and short-term rentals were not prohibited in the bylaws. The board had no power to intervene. Her voice, once treated with fear, was now viewed as noise. Her authority cracked for the first time. That only made her angrier. She started message threads online, venting anonymously about outsiders invading the neighborhood and dangerous structures being rented to strangers. But even there, she found little sympathy. Commoners praised the idea. One even wrote, "I'd book that in a heartbeat." Her anger only grew. All the while, the treehouse gained traction far beyond the neighborhood. A guest posted a TikTok showing the balcony view at sunset. That single video racked up millions of views. Suddenly, the listing was booked 6 months in advance. Travel bloggers began emailing the family. Influencers requested collaborations. A tiny treehouse built to entertain an 8-year-old was now becoming a destination. With demand soaring, the family decided to take everything a step further. They built a website. They created a brand name. They added a fire pit, outdoor hammock nook, and a welcome guide with recommended local attractions. They installed fairy lights along the walkway and a keypad lock for contactless check-in. This wasn't just a treehouse anymore. It was a full-scale micro-hospitality operation. Then came the article. A travel blog published a feature titled, family turns HOA dispute into $50,000 Treehouse Airbnb business. It spread across social media. People loved the underdog story. They loved the revenge. And they especially loved how it made the HOA look ridiculous. The comment sections were brutal. Hundreds of thousands of strangers mocked the neighbor without even knowing her name. She became a viral punchline without ever showing her face. The HOA was suddenly in a terrible position. Their secretary was the most hated person in the neighborhood, and they had no control. The board tried to distance themselves, but everyone knew she was the one who triggered it. Parents whispered about her at the park. Teenagers made jokes under their breath when they passed her driveway. Her reputation, once tied to order and authority, was now synonymous with pettiness and defeat. And yet, she still refused to give up. She tried to call zoning enforcement, only to discover everything was legal. She called the county. They sent her back to zoning. She called Airbnb. They didn't care. She even wrote a letter to the local news, but they never responded. The system she once weaponized no longer served her. The treehouse, meanwhile, kept growing. What had been a child's play space became a polished retreat with a miniature kitchen, fridge, climate control, and a reading nook under a skylight. Guests returned for anniversaries. Some even proposed there. The homeowners started receiving requests for additional nights or for more units. That sparked yet another idea. If one treehouse could earn this much, what about two? The parents began researching additional structures allowed under their zoning approval. They looked at prefab tiny houses, shipping container cabins, glamping domes, and even custom-built tree pods. The potential for expansion was enormous. Their backyard, once ordinary, was becoming a business empire. The more successful it became, the more desperate their neighbor grew. She watched from her window when guests roasted marshmallows at night, and her jealousy twisted into something toxic. Instead of accepting defeat, she began imagining that if she just found the right angle, the right law, the right complaint, she could still win. That illusion kept her awake at night, and she finally thought she had found a way. While scrolling through municipal regulations, she discovered something buried deep in the code. A section requiring periodic safety inspections for structures used as temporary lodging. If she could provoke the city into an inspection, maybe they'd find something, anything, that would shut it down. Or so she hoped. She submitted a formal complaint. An inspector was scheduled. The family greeted him calmly, confident in their work. Every beam had been reinforced, every outlet properly installed, every structural requirement exceeded. The inspector spent over an hour documenting details, checking hardware, reviewing paperwork. When he finished, he signed off with 0 violations. Not only had the neighbor failed again, her complaint triggered official documentation that verified the treehouse as structurally sound and fully compliant. The parents now had a certified report they could use for marketing. What was meant to destroy them had made them stronger. The neighbor, upon learning this, finally broke. Her anger didn't just simmer, it boiled. And now, she was no longer just an irritated neighbor. She was an adversary with nothing left to lose. The treehouse had become a business. Her humiliation had become a spectacle, and she was about to take things much further. The moment the inspector signed off on the treehouse, something shifted inside the neighbor. Her frustration was no longer just about the structure. It wasn't even about the HOA rules. It was about the loss of control. Her voice, once respected, feared, obeyed, meant nothing now. The treehouse had become a symbol, not just of defiance, but of her failure. She stopped hiding her anger. Instead of glare-filled silence, she began operating with open hostility. Every car that pulled into the driveway was photographed. Every sound from the backyard was recorded. She wrote long, obsessive emails to the HOA with subject lines like urgent community violation and immediate board action required, even though she no longer had the support of the board. But where the HOA faltered, she doubled down. Her first move was escalation by volume. She found every agency she could think of and reported the treehouse, the fire department, county health services, the tax assessor, even animal control. She claimed electrical hazards, sewage contamination, and unlicensed lodging. She wrote her complaints like legal indictments, but none of them stuck. Each agency found the same thing. Everything was compliant. That only made her more furious. When the system wouldn't bend to her will, she tried turning the neighborhood against the family. She posted paranoid warnings in the community Facebook group about strangers potentially casing homes, implying that Airbnb guests were criminals. She hinted that she had evidence of illegal activity. She spread rumors that the owners were running a hotel out of their backyard. But the neighborhood wasn't the same as it once was. Some people found her entertaining. Others found her intolerable. Even the HOA president privately admitted he regretted ever encouraging her. What she believed was righteous protection looked, to everyone else, like obsession. Meanwhile, the Treehouse continued thriving. It gained a spot on a local top 10 unique stays list. Couples booked months in advance. Travel influencers requested free stays in exchange for social media features. Someone even suggested it could become a wedding venue. The parents didn't flaunt the success, but they didn't hide it either. They maintained the property meticulously, greeted guests kindly, and kept everything peaceful. Their only real reaction to the neighbor was to continue improving, because every tantrum she threw only pushed them further toward innovation. That alone was enough to send her spiraling. One night, she sat in her dimly lit dining room, surrounded by HOA codebooks, legal printouts, and binders of her own notes. Her face was tight with exhaustion. The treehouse glowed outside her window like a taunt. Warm lights through the leaves, laughter drifting from inside, a symbol of how powerless she had become. So she made a decision. If legal pathways had failed her, she would use force. It started subtly. Guests found passive-aggressive notes on their cars. The walkway lights were mysteriously unplugged. One evening, the gate leading to the backyard was discovered wide open, though no one had touched it. The family shrugged it off at first, maybe kids, maybe a prank. But soon, the pattern became obvious. Security cameras were installed. That only enraged her further. The footage eventually revealed her walking past the property at odd hours, staring directly at the cameras. It was as if she wanted to be seen, as if she hoped they'd confront her so she could claim harassment. But the homeowners said nothing, choosing instead to document everything. And then came the night that changed everything. A guest staying in the treehouse reported hearing loud banging on the supports beneath the platform. It sounded like someone striking the wood with something heavy. When the father reviewed the camera footage, he saw her, just before midnight, creeping across the lawn, swinging what appeared to be a metal rod at the structure. It was attempted vandalism. Maybe worse. They could have pressed charges. They could have had her arrested. But instead, they made a different choice, one that would change the power dynamic forever. They contacted an attorney. Not to sue, not to fight, but to protect. Within weeks, the treehouse was officially incorporated as a registered LLC. It was no longer just a backyard project. It was a business entity, which meant harassment or interference could now be treated as damage to a commercial operation. The stakes had changed. Every sabotage attempt from that point forward would carry real legal consequences. The neighbor had stepped on a dangerous ground, and she didn't even know it. But the family didn't stop there. They began expanding their operations, as if to spite her existence. Plans were drawn for a second rental unit. A small modern cabin on stilts, positioned on the opposite side of the yard with its own private entrance. A hot tub was ordered. A local contractor was hired. Then, permits were filed. The day the new construction notice went up, the neighbor lost whatever restraint she had left. She stormed across the cul-de-sac demanding answers, but no one listened. The family didn't even need to respond. Her rage had become white noise. Word spread among residents that she was unhinged. Someone anonymously posted a meme in the neighborhood group. A picture of the treehouse labeled business and a picture of her labeled HOA. The comments were merciless. People stopped taking her side. Even her closest allies quietly distanced themselves. And yet, she refused to back down. As the new cabin frame began rising, she made one final attempt to reclaim power, a lawsuit. She filed paperwork with the county court alleging zoning violations, safety hazards, and emotional distress. She claimed the treehouse was lowering property values, threatening public safety, and destroying her quality of life. She spent thousands in legal fees. She believed this would be the grand moment where she'd finally take control again. But the lawsuit would uncover something she never expected. Because when the judge reviewed the case, he noticed something she had overlooked, something not about the treehouse, but about her own home. The very bylaws she had weaponized for years revealed that her storage shed, built on her side yard years ago, was technically non-compliant and had never been approved. It was a direct violation of the same rules she used to attack everyone else. The court dismissed her case. But worse, her shed was now officially subject to removal. She had spent years policing everyone else's property. Now her own was at risk. And that irony, that poetic reversal, was about to turn her entire world upside down. The dismissal of the lawsuit hit her like a silent explosion. She had expected a courtroom reckoning, a dramatic victory where she finally forced the family to tear down their treehouse empire. Instead, she walked out with nothing but a reprimand and a warning about her own violations. It was humiliating, not just personally but publicly. The courtroom wasn't empty. People talked, and within days, the entire neighborhood knew. Her shed, built a decade earlier without approval, was now technically illegal. It wasn't just a minor oversight. It was the exact kind of violation she had spent years shaming others for. She had sent letters to neighbors demanding they remove porch swings, repaint mailboxes, and trim hedges. Yet her own structure had bypassed the very process she insisted everyone else follow. The community didn't respond with pity. They responded with poetic justice. The HOA board, tired of defending her, voted to issue an official notice. She was given 30 days to remove the shed. The same format she had used countless times, cold, bureaucratic, patronizing, was now addressed to her. Even the wording felt like a mirror held up to her worst traits. Her reputation collapsed overnight. Neighbors who once feared her now laughed behind closed doors. Some were openly relieved to see her influence fading. Others, who had been quietly targeted by her for years, felt vindicated. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with thinly veiled jokes. Someone posted a screenshot of the original viral article about the treehouse and added a single line: "Karma hits harder than any HOA rule." But removing the shed wasn't her biggest problem. The lawsuit had cost her thousands. The attorney fees had drained her savings. The HOA quietly refused to reimburse her, distancing themselves from her actions. Even her spouse, normally indifferent to her crusades, stopped defending her. Her once tidy routines broke down. Her blinds stayed closed. Her footsteps creaked through the house at odd hours of the night. Something in her had shifted from control to desperation. Meanwhile, the treehouse business reached new heights. The second rental cabin was completed and furnished with clean Scandinavian lines and full amenities. The family announced that they were branding the entire property as a micro-resort experience. Guests were now greeted with personalized welcome baskets. A local bakery partnered with them to deliver fresh pastries. A photographer offered discounted packages for honeymooning couples. The family added a booking website, a logo, a wait list, and even merchandise. The treehouse that once sparked a petty HOA complaint now supported a small ecosystem of local businesses. Newspapers wrote follow-up stories about the Airbnb treehouse feud, and the narrative evolved from mere drama into a feel-good fable about resilience and creativity. Property investors reached out. A documentary YouTuber requested an interview. The family turned down multiple offers from reality TV producers. They weren't interested in fame for fame's sake, only in continuing what they had built. And yet, despite everything, the neighbor did not give up. Her humiliation only fueled her paranoia. She became fully convinced that the family had destroyed her life. In her mind, the treehouse was not just a symbol. It was a weapon intentionally designed to torment her. She convinced herself the entire neighborhood hated her because of them. She lost the ability to see her own downfall as self-inflicted. She stopped attending HOA meetings. She stopped speaking to nearly everyone. But she didn't stop plotting. Late at night, she sat hunched at her computer, scrolling through forums, legal blogs, even conspiracy sites. She researched loopholes, code enforcement strategies, anonymous reporting methods. Her goal was no longer compliance or even enforcement. It was sabotage. Then she found something. Buried in the city's property tax code, she discovered regulations about commercial structures and taxable use. If she could get the treehouse reclassified in a way that imposed taxes retroactively, maybe she could suffocate their profits. She drafted a detailed complaint accusing the family of misreporting their property use. She attached photos, screenshots, booking dates, even Google Maps images. She mailed it off with a renewed sense of purpose. Weeks passed. Then she received a response, not from the city, but from the family's attorney. The complaint had backfired. Because the treehouse was legally registered as a business, the tax regulations that applied to it also allowed the family to write off landscaping, utilities, maintenance equipment, and even part of their mortgage as business expenses. Not only was she unsuccessful at imposing penalties, she inadvertently helped them secure additional tax benefits. Every time she struck, she made them stronger. Her anger, once sharp and calculated, began to crumble into something unhinged. She stopped keeping records in neat binders. Papers piled on her countertops. Scribbles covered legal pads. She no longer spoke calmly. She muttered, ranted, paced, stared at her window, like waiting for a battle she had already lost. And that battle would soon become impossible to ignore. The day the shed was removed, the neighborhood watched. A contractor arrived early, dismantling the structure piece by piece, a symbolic reversal of every demand she had made to others. She stood on her driveway in silence, arms folded, eyes hollow, as her authority was loaded into a truck and hauled away. No one comforted her. No one offered sympathy. The community she spent years trying to control no longer wanted her. She retreated inside her house and disappeared. She might have stayed quiet forever, broken but contained, if not for what happened next. Because the family wasn't done expanding. While she mourned her lost power, something new was quietly taking shape next door. Plans for a third rental unit were filed with the city. And this time, it wasn't just a treehouse or cabin. It was a full luxury tree pod suspended on cables between two massive oaks, with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the entire neighborhood. The view would be breathtaking, but for her, it would be unbearable, because that pod would look directly into her backyard, and she was about to lose the last sense of privacy she had left. The plans for the third unit were more ambitious than anything the family had done before. It wasn't just another cabin or a renovated shed, or even a traditional treehouse. It was a suspended glass pod, a sleek, modern sphere perched in the branches like a futuristic observatory. Minimalist, quiet, floating between two ancient oaks, yet engineered to withstand storms, wind, and weight. Its walls were transparent like a jewel case, offering panoramic views of the sunset, the garden below, and the rooftops beyond, including hers. It was designed to feel like sleeping in the sky. It was a marvel of architecture and engineering. It was the kind of thing that belonged in a travel magazine or a nature retreat in Bali, not a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. And for most neighbors, that was exactly the appeal. It was beautiful, unexpected, whimsical, a symbol of creativity flourishing where conformity once ruled. But for the woman who had built her life around enforcing sameness, it was a nightmare. When she first saw the crane lifting the prefabricated sections into the air, she froze at her kitchen window. Her eyes followed every cable, every bolt, every motion. She didn't see innovation. She didn't see artistry. She saw a threat. The pod extended higher than the original treehouse, positioned at the perfect angle to overlook her yard. It wasn't intrusive by design. It simply occupied the only natural space the trees allowed. But through her eyes, it felt personal, targeted, cruel. She began to shutter her blinds during the day. She avoided her own backyard. Every time she stepped outside, the outline of the pod glimmered in her peripheral vision like a silent taunt. Even before it was finished, the sight of it overwhelmed her. She convinced herself the family had built it intentionally to spite her, to violate her privacy, to humiliate her further, to dominate the neighborhood and claim victory. She didn't just feel challenged anymore. She felt surrounded. The HOA board, once her kingdom, refused to entertain any new complaints. The city ignored her letters. Neighbors rolled their eyes and walked away the moment she tried to bring it up. Her shed was gone. Her position was gone. And soon, her last sense of solitude would be gone too. But while she crumbled, the family was once again thriving. The construction timeline was filmed and posted online, drawing millions of views. The pod became a viral sensation before it was even complete. People shared it as architectural inspiration. Eco-living blogs reposted it. Designers applauded the minimal footprint and suspended foundation. Comments poured in from strangers calling it dreamy, genius, the future of travel. Reservations filled faster than ever. The family hired an assistant just to manage bookings. They installed a walkway lined with soft lighting that turned the pod into a glowing orb at night. They added soundproof insulation so guests could sleep in silence despite the elevation. They partnered with an environmental nonprofit and committed to planting trees for every stay. The pod was no longer just a rental. It was an experience, a brand, a destination, and every bit of it existed because the neighbor had tried to tear the original treehouse down. The irony was so immense that even guests who had never met her felt it. They read the story online, the comments, the articles. They knew the drama before they arrived. Some even whispered about her in grocery stores when they recognized the neighborhood. She had become a character in a story she could not control, reduced to a cautionary tale about what happens when obsession turns self-destructive. And yet, her obsession still wasn't finished. One night, long after construction was completed and the pod was ready for its first guest, she walked outside and stared up at its silhouette. A faint glow through the tinted walls shimmered like a lighthouse beacon. In her mind, it was spying on her, even when empty. Her thoughts twisted into scenarios no rational mind would entertain. She imagined guests taking photos of her yard, recording noises, filing complaints about her, taking her place in the social hierarchy she once controlled. She convinced herself she was being watched, judged, mocked, erased. It was no longer about rules. It was about identity. Years of policing, filing, controlling, and enforcing had become the core of who she was. Without it, she felt hollow. And the pod didn't just symbolize her loss, it exposed it. It forced her to confront the reality she had avoided for so long. She no longer mattered. Her power was gone. Her status was gone. Her voice was gone. So she clung to the last weapon she had left, fear. She attempted a neighborhood petition, but only 2 people signed it. Neither of them actually lived in the subdivision. She contacted a local news station, but they declined after learning the permits were valid. She even tried calling the police again, claiming trespassing and surveillance, but the officers recognized her name from past complaints and left without filing a report. Each attempt dug her deeper into isolation. The breaking point came the night the first guest stayed in the pod. A young couple celebrating an anniversary. They watched the sunset from their glass loft, drank wine, took photos, and posted them online with glowing captions about the most peaceful weekend ever. Meanwhile, just a short distance away, their presence sent the HOA neighbor into a full panic spiral. She paced her living room. She stared through tiny slits in her blinds. She felt trapped in her own home, rows of lights in the pod flickering like eyes in the darkness. The next morning, the couple wrote a handwritten note thanking the homeowners for the unforgettable experience. The neighbor, in contrast, wrote a 14-page manifesto accusing the pod of violating constitutional privacy rights. It was over. Her credibility was gone. Her influence was gone. And now, finally, her sanity was slipping too. But her story wasn't finished yet. Not until one final incident forced everyone, including the family, to confront just how deep her obsession ran. Because before the pod could earn its first 5-star review, something happened that neither side expected. One night, the security cameras captured movement beneath the pod. A figure in the darkness, carrying tools, moving with intent. Not vandalism this time, not sabotage, something far more dangerous, something that would change everything. The footage began as a vague, grainy blur, shadows shifting beneath the suspended pod. The motion-activated camera caught only fragments at first. Glints of metal, the silhouette of one person, slow, deliberate movements along the structural supports. The family didn't notice until morning, when the system emailed a notification marked activity detected. When they opened the footage, the truth was immediate and undeniable. It was her. The neighbor moved slowly, like someone working through a plan rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. She wore gloves, a hood. She held tools that gleamed beneath the camera's infrared light, tools designed not for construction, but for destruction. A wrench, a handsaw, a flashlight held between her teeth. She wasn't vandalizing out of rage anymore. She was trying to dismantle the support beams. Quietly, methodically, with purpose. She was attempting to bring the pod down. The family could have called the police instantly. They could have sent the footage to the HOA, the city, the news. They could have filed charges for attempted property damage, trespassing, and possibly worse. But instead, something stopped them. It wasn't fear. It was the realization of just how far she had fallen. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was a breakdown. She was no longer fighting an HOA war. She was unraveling in plain sight. The family called their attorney, then the police, not in anger, but with caution. They requested that the officers conduct a mental health assessment before filing charges. They didn't want to escalate into something catastrophic. That decision, made quietly and without comment, would later define how their story was remembered. When officers arrived at her home later that morning, she didn't answer the door. They had to speak to her spouse and eventually coax her out, exhausted, disheveled, trembling. She didn't deny what she had done. She couldn't. The evidence was overwhelming. But she insisted she had been protecting the neighborhood. She claimed the pod was spying on her. She insisted she had been pushed into action by forces beyond her control. For the first time in years, no one believed her. The police issued a no trespass order. The attorney filed a restraining order. The family chose not to pursue criminal charges beyond what was necessary to keep her away. They didn't need her punished. They only needed to be safe. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood, once silent, once complicit in her behavior, finally confronted the truth. They began quietly talking in driveways and at mailboxes about the years they had endured her enforcement, her letters, her surveillance, her threats. They realized that while she had aimed her rage at the Treehouse family, they had all been targets at one point or another. They had simply been too afraid or too tired to push back. Now that fear was gone, residents who had once avoided conflict stepped forward. They petitioned the HOA to remove her permanently. The board, already split and exhausted, voted unanimously to revoke her title. Her key card to the amenities office was deactivated. Her powers, both real and imagined, were gone. She was no longer the HOA enforcer. She was a cautionary tale. Her home became quiet after that. Some said she was seeking treatment. Others said she had sold the house privately. All that was certain was that she no longer appeared in windows, no longer hovered in the street, no longer policed anyone. Some neighbors felt pity. Others felt relief. Life moved on, and the Treehouse business, the one she tried so desperately to destroy, continued to thrive. Not out of spite, but out of passion. The pod opened with a fully booked first year. Guests arrived from other states, then other countries. The property was featured in a travel documentary, then in a design magazine. It became known not just for its architecture, but for its origin story. A story of a family who turned pettiness into purpose. A story of a neighbor who tried to destroy something simple and beautiful, and instead accidentally helped build something bigger than any of them imagined. The children of the family, once just excited to have a treehouse, grew up with the knowledge that creativity can outlast control, that a hostile force can inspire something better, that spite can be recycled into progress if channeled wisely. And the treehouse, beautiful, fully legal, profitable, stood as a monument to resilience. Years later, when new residents moved into the neighborhood, the story was retold like folklore. They learned about the saga not through complaints or warnings, but from locals who told it with amusement, sympathy, and a bit of awe. The treehouse was no longer a source of conflict. It was a landmark, a trendsetter, a reminder of what happens when one person pushes so hard against joy that they break themselves instead. The HOA quietly updated their bylaws after the incident, not to restrict tree houses or tiny homes, but to prevent any future board member from wielding that kind of unchecked power again. For the first time, the rules became clearer, and the community actually felt more like a community. As for the family, they expanded once more, not by building another structure, but by buying the property next door when it finally went on the market. Whether it was theirs or sold by someone else didn't matter. What mattered was what they did with it. They turned the second lot into a communal gathering space, an outdoor garden lounge where guests, neighbors, and friends could sit beneath string lights, talk, share food, and watch the treehouse glow above the yard. No fences, no grudges, just open space. The story that began as a simple children's project had become something transformative, both for the family and for the neighborhood. What was built out of love and defended out of principle had not only survived the war someone tried to wage against it, but emerged stronger, more creative, and deeply rooted in the values that had started it all. And somewhere, for better or worse, the former HOA queen now lived outside the walls she once tried so desperately to control. Whether she regretted her actions, no one knew. But her legacy remained carved into the story, an unintended architect of everything she fought against. The treehouse still stood. The pod still glowed at night. And the neighborhood finally understood the lesson she never learned. Rules can maintain order, but resentment can build empires.